Welcome back to Even Tacos Fall Apart. I'm MommaFoxFire, and whether you're listening on your way to work, while folding laundry, or just carving out a few moments of peace for yourself, I want to thank you for making time to join this conversation. Life can feel like a never-ending cycle of demands. Work, family, friends, bills, appointments, errands. It's like we're all constantly playing catch-up. And somewhere in the middle of that, we're supposed to find balance, peace, and maybe even a little happiness. For a lot of us, that feels like an impossible goal, especially when just keeping our own heads above water takes everything we've got. But here's the thing, feeling overwhelmed and overworked isn't just about having too much on your plate. It's about the pressures we face from all directions, our jobs, our families, society, and even our own internal selves, to keep doing more, being more, and giving more, often without stopping to ask why or if it's sustainable. It's no wonder so many people feel burnt out and stuck in survival mode. That's exactly why I'm so excited to bring you this conversation today. My guest is Ann Robinson, a licensed therapist and social worker with many years of experience helping people navigate the tough stuff, life transitions, relationship struggles, and the kind of patterns that leave us spinning our wheels. Ann is down-to-earth, whip-smart, and incredibly insightful about what it takes to go from feeling overwhelmed and overworked to living a life that actually feels balanced and peaceful. In this episode, we're talking about how to recognize the signs that you're overwhelmed, why it's so hard for some of us to say no, and how societal norms, especially for women, play a huge role in perpetuating this cycle. Ann shares practical tools for managing stress, setting boundaries, and figuring out what's really important to you so you can start living in a way that aligns. Ann also gets into why transitions, even positive ones like a new job or a growing family, can shake us up and leave us feeling unsteady. She offers simple, actionable tips for managing those moments without completely losing yourself in the process. We're not here to pretend it's easy to make changes. This conversation, as always, is about real talk, real strategies, and giving yourself permission to find a way forward that works for you. Before we dive into the interview, I want to remind you to follow Even Tacos Fall Apart wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss future episodes. If you love what you hear, leave a review or share this episode with someone who might need it. And as always, if you have thoughts, questions, or your own stories about finding balance, feel free to reach out. You can connect with me on social media or through the links in the show notes. I love hearing from you. Now let's jump into the conversation with Ann Robinson. I hope this episode leaves you feeling seen, supported, and maybe even a little more ready to tackle whatever's on your plate this week. Hello and welcome back to another Mental Health Monday here on Even Tacos Fall Apart. I am thrilled to be back here. It has been quite a Monday for me. We're gearing up for school and all that good stuff. So if I seem a little scatterbrained, that's probably all that it is just the fact that my kids are needing a little extra of my brain space this week. But I'm really excited. Speaking of being a little overwhelmed, I'm really excited for tonight's conversation because we're going to be talking about being overwhelmed and overworked versus finding that balance and peace in your life. And I am joined tonight by Ann Robinson, and we're going to talk through this a little bit. So before we get started, before I introduce Ann, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, let me hit this button before I say this. Now we officially do have a question queue open. And if you have any questions for our guest tonight that are about the topic or about what we're talking about, feel free to pop those into the chat and we will address them while we are here live. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining in. And thank you for taking the time out today and popping on here with us.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let me tell you a little bit about Ann and then we will dive in here. Ann is a therapist and social worker licensed in Colorado and Indiana. As a therapist, she loves working with folks who are determined to make sense of their lives, relationships, and patterns that feel disruptive or impactful in their lives. People who are in some kind of transition, whether that's work, life, or love, are right up her alley. Personally, she is an LGBTQ ally. She was born and raised in Philadelphia and is a long time binge watcher of TV shows. And she lives for matchmaking clients and friends with other people that they'll love and who will love them. She believes that while what we talk about in therapy can really be really serious, there's always room for some silliness, which y'all know is something that I also wholeheartedly believe. So if you are looking to connect with Ann and all, I'm going to post some socials on here, website and Instagram, or where she can be found. Feel free to click through to those, give her a follow, find some posts, give them some likes, all that good stuff. And yeah, again, thanks just for joining us and taking the time to be here.
Yeah, I'm like thrilled for our conversation. I think it'll be great.
Yeah, I hope so. That's always what I hope.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more just about your life experiences maybe, or what made you become interested in specializing in mental health.
Yeah, great question. So we were talking a little bit before we were recording about like going to college and how long that can take. And I had shared that it took me 10 years to finish my undergraduate degree because I kept switching what I wanted to do. So I would kind of jump all over the place. But I think when I'm thinking about my origin story in mental health, it kind of dates back to when I was a preteen and I had some like hard situations happen in my family. I lost a parent pretty young, and there's nothing that adults love more than like a resilient child, right? So my teachers and school counselors, they like funneled me into peer counseling in the school that I was in at the age of, I think I was 12. And that was like my first gateway into feeling like I could really help other people or even just like sit with them when they were struggling with something. And I never like lost that passion or interest since then.
Yeah, I want to pick at what you just said a little bit
Yeah.
because you said, adults really love a resilient child. Do you view that as a good thing or a bad thing, or do you think it could be either
Hmm.
way?
I think it could be either way. I think there are some situations as adults where we're really uncomfortable with kids grieving. And so we like to channel them into something that feels like productive.
Mhm.
Um, and when I think it's when we do it because we're uncomfortable with the emotions that kids are showing up with, it can be challenging or it like is worth being curious of. I think ultimately we love stories of resilience regardless of the age of the person. We love hearing a good like bounce back story. We love like a good overcoming story. And that's true regardless of the age of the person. And I think there's something to that in that we can connect to other people's adversity, even if it's not the same as what we've experienced.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And
Yeah.
sometimes you hear like, oh, they're such an easy kid because they are so resilient. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
are they hiding something behind that? Like, what's going on there? So I was just curious about
Right.
that comment.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
What is your favorite thing about working in mental health, and what have been some of the biggest challenges in this work?
Mm. Well, so there's a couple of different ways that people come to be therapists, and they can be trained as social workers, they can be trained as mental or as professional counselors, they can be trained as marriage and family therapists or psychologists. So those are typically like the avenues. One of the things that I think is really unique about being a social worker is that we're really trained to think critically about the systems that we're involved in. So that could be, if you're talking about children or teens, that could be the educational system and their family system and their friend system, as well as different systems that are parts of our identity. So if we identify as queer, we have to think about like how we're engaging with the queer community. If we identify as white or non-white, we have to think about how that impacts our access to those different systems, which I really love and appreciate. And I think is also one of the really hard things about working in mental health is that these systems that we are a part of can be really damaging and harmful. And that includes the healthcare system. It includes the stigmas that people experience who are accessing mental health care, and really seeing how challenging they can be to navigate as a professional and as a human can feel really tiring sometimes.
Mm.
But I think one of the things that keeps me involved and passionate is being able to connect with people and being able to bear witness to their stories and like seeing and feeling people's progress over the course of our relationship together.
Yeah. I I can't imagine that any good therapist is someone who doesn't love seeing like the progress in their patients. You know, I feel like
Totally. Yeah,
that's a requirement. You got to love people. You got to love watching them grow and kind of
you do.
celebrating with them a little bit. I know my therapist, like, she definitely is one of those. She'll express how happy she is with whatever happened or whatever, you know, anything. I mean, she also
Mhm.
expresses when she's not happy with something. So
Totally. But I
there's
think
that. But
all of that is about someone bearing witness to what your
hmm,
experiences are, the good, bad, or the indifferent, right? Of like
yeah,
knowing that you had someone with you in that journey helps us feel stronger and more courageous.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Most
Yeah.
definitely. All
Yeah.
right. So this question is a little bit in a different vein, but do you have a serial killer or true crime story that fascinates you?
Okay. So I love this question. I have to say, like, as a person, I lean a little bit more culty than I do serial killer.
Mm,
But if I were to pick a serial killer that I'm most interested in, there was a documentary on HBO a couple of years ago called The Tales of the Grim Sleeper, I think was the name of it. And it's about a decade old, but it was following the serial killer in LA who
hmm.
only targeted like sex workers in LA. And he was able to kill, I don't know, I was like, I think over 60 women before he was caught. And what I found so interesting about that story was that it spoke to the fact that like his victims were not people that culturally we valued in the same
Hmm.
way that allowed him to continue to be able to like hunt and kill. Um, so that was really interesting. He was also like a black serial killer, which is
Hmm.
not common. So yeah, that was a really interesting story stand out for me. I think if we're thinking about like cult leaders that I'm interested in following, Keith Raniere of the Nexium cult in New York is weird as shit. And just really fascinating. I think the energy of cult leaders and serial killers is very similar in this desire to kind of control and manage and um, there's always kind of like a value system or like a code of ethics that people work by that justifies their behavior. Um, and cults just don't scare me as much as serial killers. They're easier for me to like watch and read about.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of documentaries right now on Netflix about that Nexium
Yeah,
cult. They're
yeah.
fascinating. And you know what? You know what makes me really love watching stuff about cults
Mhm.
is that if you apply it then to like MLMs or pyramid schemes,
Yeah.
multi-level marketing, it's like they're also in a cult.
Uh-huh.
Because
Yeah,
you can watch and if you're like, let's just tone down a little bit of the crime side of it, and there's your little cult right there.
totally. And like the Nexium cult in particular, and this was true. There was one that was just recently, there was a documentary on HBO about that was a cult in Colorado. Um, Mother Love maybe was her name or
Mm,
something. But what was so interesting about the Nexium cult in particular was that they took therapeutic tools. So, tools that you would find in cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy, which are very like popular types of therapy, and they like pulled them out and then used them. So, it's a cult that's based on like self
oh
help
wow. Yeah.
as opposed to like some kind of religious belief or like afterlife situation, which you can find most often in cults. Um, but I think I'm so interested about when it comes to cults is that it really speaks to that like human desire to belong and
Hmm.
to feel like you have purpose, which is what they tap into in these MLMs too, right? Is
Yes.
that like
Yes.
we are the ones who are helping people,
Hmm.
right? We are the ones that have the answers. We are the ones that can end suffering
Hmm.
by selling supplements or essential oils or leggings or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's really neat to think about like taking those therapeutic tools
Uh-huh.
that are
Uh-huh.
so ingrained into what you do and so ingrained
Uh-huh.
into those of us who like are in therapy and all of that, and turn it into something more
Mm-hmm.
sinister. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're just tools, right? It depends on the motivation behind someone, whether that is for the good or for the bad. So, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. So
Is
back to the
the
idea of intention, right?
Yeah,
So is if
yeah.
our intention is to like support resiliency because
Hmm.
that supports strength and that supports people feeling equipped and prepared, like I'm all for that. If it's because I don't like the feelings that this makes me feel, that's a different thing. Or if it's because I don't believe the adults in my life can handle my big feelings, that's
Yeah,
another thing to consider. Yeah.
yeah. The other one that you mentioned, is it Love Has Won? Is that the right one?
It may have been. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she was a cult leader. So again, like a female cult leader, which is not as
Yeah.
commonly experienced.
Hmm.
She had a commune or a cult in Crestone, Colorado, which is kind of like a hippy dippy mountain town in southwest of Denver. That was fascinating too.
Yeah, that's wild.
Mm-hmm.
It's really wild to just see all, especially with all the documentaries coming out, because you can just watch and
Totally.
watch and watch all these documentaries and pick at them.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and the themes are so similar between
Yeah.
them,
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
Mhm.
Hey, Growling, we are talking about being overwhelmed and overworked versus finding balance and peace. So if you have any questions related to that, feel free to pop them in into the chat while you're here. So, getting to the main topic tonight, how do you define a balanced and peaceful life? And why do you think some people struggle to achieve that balance and that peace?
Yeah. So I like to think about balance as when we are living a life that's aligned with our values. And so when we're clear on what matters to us and why, it makes it so much easier to make decisions aligned with that.
Mm,
When we are living a life that is for other people's happiness or other people's satisfaction or what I think is like good or right without really having a connection to what that is, then we end up with like a tail wagging the dog situation, right? Where it's like the target is constantly moving, which then reinforces this belief that we're not doing enough, we're not enough, we need to do more, we need to try this new thing, we're always kind of searching for a home for that energy to go into.
mm-hmm.
And that can lead to a really imbalanced life. When I think about a life being imbalanced or like our priorities being imbalanced, it really comes down to not knowing why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm,
And that can result in like working too much or giving too much or being a people pleaser or some of these other terms that are like pretty common, and reinforced. Like culturally, we support
yeah.
people in doing more than they are comfortable doing, working more than they're supposed to be doing, sacrificing more than they have available to them. And we stigmatize people, especially like female identifying people who say no
Mm,
or who say they can't do it. Right. And so even if we decline or don't do something, there's often a lot of apologizing and there's a lot of guilt and there's a lot of justifying why we can't do something,
mm,
instead of the answer just being like, I can't do that for you. Or I think Jane Fonda once said, like, when I turned 60, I learned that no was a complete sentence.
yeah.
Right. Um, so yeah.
I've I've really loved seeing some different content creators, especially female content creators, putting these different pieces out that are talking about saying no, in especially in a work
Mhm.
situation,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
saying like, that's not in my job description, or have you, are you willing to pay me more if you want me to do
Right.
this? And it's so, even seeing that and even liking seeing that, it's still,
Mhm.
I still have that feeling of, I don't think I could do that.
Yeah.
I don't think I
Yeah.
could say that, because I am the kind of person who is like, you want me to do something, I'll probably wind up doing it. I've gotten better about saying, okay, I'll fit that into my
Mhm.
schedule, it's like, yes, I can do that in 2 weeks, and giving them
Mhm.
something that is either unreasonably long from now or realistic, but also not super helpful so that they'll go elsewhere on their own. It is hard for me to say no, flat
Yeah.
out. Just say,
Yeah.
no, not doing that.
Mhm.
That's really difficult.
And we get so much of our social currency and our social value from being available and accessible.
Hmm.
And when we say no, or when we set timelines that we know are not what the person is looking for, that we hold a lot of tension in that, right? We hold a lot of responsibility in that. When often, like, we're okay hearing that from other people, right? When
Yeah.
other people say, like, I can do that, but it means that I won't be able to do this, or I can do that, but I realistically won't be able to get to it until next Friday. We're typically like, okay, like that's doable or reasonable, or actually, like, I can do it faster than that, so I'm
Hmm.
just going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I don't mind when other people say no or other people give me
Mhm.
a, oh, here's when I can do it.
Yeah.
It's fine for other people to say that.
Yeah, and you're not alone in that, right? And I experience this as well, right? There are definitely times where I have a hard time saying no, or I have a hard time um, having like a real reflective moment with myself on, like, can I reasonably do this, or can I do this in a way that I want to, or will I be able to do it the best way that I can given the other stressors that are happening in my life right now? Um, or even just the act of, like, pausing and thinking before you answer. Like, that's a
Yeah.
skill.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I know we're talking a lot about work, but I mean this extrapolates to
Oh, yeah.
relationships and everything as well, family and I mean kids to an extent, although being responsible for other humans is a little bit of a different beast, I guess.
It is. And we also know parents or caregivers that we've experienced that, like, take on way too much,
Hmm.
right? And their kids could do more, or their partners could do more, um, or their kids don't need that, right? Like, I've had
Yeah.
colleagues before where their kids are in 18 different after school activities, and their every evening is devoted to running three kids in four different directions
Yeah.
for 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, I won't reveal what I just had to go through to be like, let me make sure that this activity doesn't overlap with this activity before I say, yes,
Uh-huh.
you can do it. Because it is
Yes.
like that's like school is starting up in 2 days, and that means all the
Mhm.
activities are starting up. The only one that doesn't start up at the very beginning is horses because they give the horses August off. And so none of those lessons start until September. But the rest of it, I'm like, okay, well, we have to reserve this day for horses. So we have
Mhm.
a couple of weeks where there's nothing on this day.
Mhm.
When?
One day. Uh-huh.
Until then. Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough
It
balancing
is.
act because of course you want to give I mean, you want to give your employer what they are supposed to get out of you. I won't say everything, but you do want to give your kids everything.
You do. You
That's
do.
hard.
Mhm. Yeah, so it comes back to, like, why, right?
Hmm.
And if we had to pick, would we pick all these things over again? And is this the best use of everybody's time? And thinking about, like, the secondary consequences of being super stressed and tired and running
Yeah.
around for hours, and is that also giving my, and I'm not picking on you when I say this, I'm just using it as an
All
example,
good.
um, of, is that giving my kids the best mom they can have,
Mm.
right? Or the best employee, or the best partner, or the best daughter, or whatever scenario you're thinking about. Of, this comes at a cost, and I don't have an unlimited reserve of time, energy, or finances for most people.
Yeah. Pick on me. That you're talking to me. It's fine. I'm good. I have never pretended to be a shining example of what to do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think that's, parenting alone is, like, the
Yeah.
most humbling experience,
Oh yeah.
in my opinion.
Most
Hmm.
definitely. What are some, or maybe what are the most common signs that someone is overwhelmed and overworked, and how can someone recognize those signs if they go looking for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it shows up a couple of different ways depending on what kind of person you are and how you respond to stress. I like to speak in like metaphors a lot. And so sometimes I talk about it being like you're in the middle of a snow globe, right? And you can like see all the things going around you, but you can't quite like see what's happening, right? Everything is kind of cloudy. Or being in the middle of a blender, right? And things are just moving around you really quickly. Another way to think about it is, and all of these come from personal experience, but having 55 browser tabs open at the same time and you're just kind of bouncing back and forth between the same 30, but you're not actually ever getting anything done. These feelings like you walk into a room and you don't remember why you were there, or you're running around the house looking for your glasses and they're on your face the entire time. So just this feeling of, I don't feel tethered to anything. I don't feel grounded. I don't, everything feels 5 minutes late. Right. And like, I'm rushing, I'm panicked. I've got that, like angsty feeling inside where things just feel kind of all shook up and disorganized. So that would be one way that people experience that. And then I would say another camp of people are your folks that like turn off and shut down and then like have analysis paralysis and can't figure out how to get one foot in front of the other. And everything feels really hard. So a lot like walking through water or running on sand where you just like there's more tension or more resistance on doing something that feels pretty typical most of the time.
Yeah. Now, what you're describing, that first camp of people, right? How do you distinguish that from like ADHD or anxiety? And then how do you distinguish the second one from something like executive dysfunction or something like that? Like, how do you know, I'm just overwhelmed and overworked, or, this is diagnosable anxiety or ADHD or something else going on?
Great question. Great question. So I would say the way I'm looking at that, is this a state or is this a trait? Right? So is this a reflection of the season that I'm in, the environment that I'm in? Can I attribute this to something else that's happening in my life? So that could be something as simple, or none of this is simple, but something like I have like a sick family member, or I'm moving, or I just changed jobs, or I just had a new child, or like a big life event. It would be, or like COVID, right? Like those would be all things that it's like, okay, like we need to kind of wait and see if this gets better on its own, or if this is something more like a trait that they're walking around the world with. And when it is something that's more of a trait, then I'm also, when I explain this to clients, I'm looking for the impact of these symptoms in like 3 or more domains of life. So is this impacting your relationships, your profession, your finances, your spirituality, your, like all of these other, again, these systems that we're a part of? Is this having negative consequences on 3 or more of those systems? And if so, then we'd be like, then maybe walking towards a diagnosis as opposed to a like, shit is really hard right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that phrase. Is it a state or a trait? That's really good. Should trademark that right now. Unless someone else already has, and then,
Yeah, I'm not sure.
So if someone comes to you and they are feeling really overwhelmed right now or stuck in that pattern of being overworked, what is kind of that, here's step one, here's the very first step that you can take to rebalance and find peace?
Yeah. So I always default back to basic needs. So are you sleeping? Are you drinking water? Are you eating food regularly? And you'd be surprised that most of the time we're missing like at least 2 of those from that 3-point equation. But what I appreciate about those 3, and as someone who like does not sleep well, I'm probably never going to have all 3 of those at the same time, but I can control 2 of those, right? And I can do my best to set myself up to also sleep well. When I am drinking enough water, eating regularly, and eating food that makes my body feel good, and sleeping or resting in like the quantities that my body needs, I'm at least then equipped to manage other parts of my life. Those are also typically, I mean, again, for the most part, if we're assuming that people have access to their basic needs, they're resources that are within our control.
Mm-hmm.
So no one can stop me from drinking enough water. No one can stop me from eating breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not contingent upon someone else also participating, which is often how we get stuck or lost.
Yeah. I know from my own experience that like water is one of those things, especially sleep. Yeah, okay. I've definitely been guilty of saying I'll sleep when the kids graduate or whatever. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's not a good solution, right? Or I'll sleep when this deadline is passed. And it's
Totally.
again not a good solution, and it's not worth risking your health for. So don't, I'm not a good example. But water is one of those things that I literally will tell myself, you're not going to drink anything right now because you have 2 hours until you're going to get to a bathroom or whatever, and you can't like,
Mm-hmm.
so how do you, if you're already in that overwhelmed and overworked state and you're like, all right, well, I can maybe sneak some food in, definitely can't drink any water,
Yeah.
I'm not going to get enough sleep. Is there something else where you're like, all right, sit down and make a list of everything, or something practical that someone could
Mm-hmm.
do as a, here's something you can sit down and do in the next couple of days that might help you feel a little more under control?
Totally. So I have two that came to mind as you were naming that. So the first one is I'm a big fan of it, like a good old fashioned brain dump. So
Mm.
set a timer for 5 minutes and write down all of the things that are swirling in your brain. All
Mm.
of the things that they could be to-do lists. They could be like, oh, I wanted to research this person. It has no context in anywhere else in my life, but I'm interested in this. It could be like, I want to save a certain amount of money, or I want to make sure I remember to call my mom, or I want to like, but just put it all down on paper, get it out of your brain. So that would be the first one. Um, the second one I just lost. So
That
maybe it
happens to
wasn't
me
that
so
great.
much.
Yeah, so a brain dump can be really, really helpful.
Mhm.
Oh, I just remembered. The second one is when we are full of worries about things, or like we're worried about deadlines, we're worried about logistics, we're worried about whatever, is you find someone that is like a trusted person in your life. So if this is a friend, this is a partner, this is a family member, it's a colleague, uh, someone that you have some sense of familiarity with, and you sit them down and you say like, I'm just like so overwhelmed right now, and I need to say out loud what's overwhelming me. So when I tell you this thing, right? So I'm worried about buying a new house. The only thing they're supposed to say is, and what else? Right? So I'm worried about buying a new house. And what else? I'm worried about so and so going to college. And what else? I'm worried about global warming because it's hotter than hell right now. And what else? I'm worried about, and so just keep going
Mhm.
until you're out of worries. And it could take 10 minutes, it could take 20 minutes, it could take an hour. But the whole point is we're not problem solving. We're just asking someone to bear witness to the things that we're worried about and join us in that connection.
I really, really like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because you don't always need someone to say, okay, well, I'm worried about buying a house. Oh, well, what are you like? What about buying a house you're worried about? Let's dive into it. Like that's not.
Nope.
Sometimes you just need to say it out loud. I am worried about this. I am worried about this. I don't
Mm-hmm.
need anything else, but I need to verbally acknowledge to another human
That's right.
that this is something that's on my mind. And setting it up that way with someone is a really, really, really good idea. I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. I mean, people love to know. It's like offering them a treasure map on how to support you in those moments, right? Because oftentimes the big worries that we have don't have easy solutions.
Hmm.
And if there were easy solutions, you would have solved it already. So it's not about solving the problem or making the worry go away. It's just about saying, like, I need someone else to see that I'm holding all of these things.
Hmm. Yeah, that's that's definitely a really neat idea, a neat
Yeah.
concept. I'm gonna have
Yeah.
to get my sister to sit with me.
Yeah. Right. And what else?
Yeah, yeah. I'll do the same for her. It'll be a good. We'll
Yeah,
just have a, and then we'll
yeah,
go get a drink.
that's right. It's really normalizing, right? Of like,
Mhm.
we all have worries that we're sitting and we're holding on to, and we feel really responsible for not burdening other people with them or feeling foolish that we're worried about them.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so the whole point of this is to just say, like, okay, like, and what
Mhm.
else? Ain't worried about Vladimir Putin, and what else?
Mhm.
Right? Like, these aren't your problems to solve, but they're here.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're doing it that way, also you can just throw in the most trivial shit too, right?
You
It
can.
doesn't have to be big. I'm worried about the I don't know, something my
Somebody in the trash out,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm worried about what my water bill is going to be this month. I'm
Mhm.
worried about how much longer
Just
my
little
pets are going to
things.
live for,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's great. So those can kind of help in that moment, right? So what are some
Yeah.
longer term therapeutic techniques or practices that you have found help clients really start shifting from that state of overwhelm to a state
Yeah.
more of balance?
Yeah. So there's a couple that are tried and true for me, or things that I come back to time and time again. And one of there's two skills in particular that are really bite-sized and easy for people to like take from this interview or just take standalone and think about applying in their own life. And one of them is a skill called opposite action. And it's much like it sounds, where when we're confronted with a situation that feels overwhelming, or when we are in a pattern of behavior that we're trying to change, we typically have an urge, right? Like when my partner says this, I have an urge to like prove him wrong, right? Like that could be the example. And I know that when that urge shows up for me, it leads to conflict and escalation, which is not actually what I want, but I want to be heard. So if I keep that in mind of like I want him to hear what I have to say and my urge is to correct him, I'm going to do the opposite of what my urge is. And I'm going to like maybe I'll listen to what he has to say and then see if he's receptive to my perspective. Or maybe I will write down the thing that I want to say to him and then sit on it for a day or 2 days or an hour and then see if it feels like it's worth still saying to him. So that way the heat of the moment has passed. This can be really helpful. So, like I gave you a relational example. This can be really helpful when we are struggling with, like, I know I need to do this thing, but I really don't want to do it. My urge is to just like ignore that I need to do the thing and go about
Mm,
my day. I'm going to lean in and do the opposite and just see how it feels. So that could be for 5 minutes. It could be like I'm committing to it for today. It could be like I'm just going to try and see. And if I change my mind, I can go back to the thing that I would typically do. So opposite action is I'm a big fan of opposite action, even just in like the challenge that it offers us to disrupt the patterns that we're used to
mhm,
being in. The second one is also like very similar to how it sounds, and it's called checking the facts. So when circumstances or situations, like we've been talking a lot about professional pressure tonight.
mhm,
So your boss emails you something and says like, I need this done by Friday, or I'm looking for this and I can't find it. Whatever, like that statement typically elicits some kind of big emotion, right?
mhm,
So whether it's panic or shame or embarrassment or frustration or anger, right? Big emotions that we feel when we feel like we're in question or we haven't performed the way that we're expected to. And when we're checking the facts, we're asking ourselves to look at the facts of the situation. Like, this was asked for. They can't find something that they think I'm responsible for, and challenge what stories we're telling ourselves about that.
mm,
So the stories behind that elicit the frustration and the panic and the shame and the anger and the like all the other big emotions that then we act out in ways that aren't good or aren't beneficial to us. Those are typically because the stories we're telling ourselves are that like he's disappointed that or they're disappointed that I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. They have no respect for my time, or the other stressors that I'm under, they just kind of like ping off these expectations that like don't feel reasonable or respectful to me. And some of that might be, it's typically based in experience, either with this person in particular or just our life experience that we're bringing into this context or situation.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we're asked to check the facts and say, like, there was nothing in their email that was unkind, there was nothing in there that was like overtly disappointed, there was nothing in there that communicated mistrust or blame. So I have the choice to take them at face value or to read into it and tell myself like what their motives are, what their
Yeah.
intentions are.
I think also with that one, and this goes back to what we talked about a little earlier as well, it's like if I were to send something and say, hey, I can't find this file, my intent would just be like, hey, I can't find this file. Can you help me? Right.
Right. I believe that you know how to answer my question.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, almost never have I sent something out like that and been like, I can't believe it.
Right.
None of the grumbling is there. It's just like, I can't find it.
I need
And
your
it,
help with something.
right. And so I know none of us want to be on the phone constantly, but boy, some things are easier, like tone especially if you just have a quick call or something. And I've had team members in the past call me with like a panic moment or something. I'm like, hey, that's all right. I'm glad you called because let's just talk it out. And it was,
Right.
it's always been something like this is happening and I don't know what to do next. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
just by calling and getting that little bit of human connection, it gives you that ability to really read into the tone and really get a more thorough answer. But just putting it into the perspective of if I sent this to someone else and they
Mm-hmm.
got it,
Mm-hmm.
this would be my intention, which is what we were talking about earlier too.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so the component that you're missing, right? This is why this happens over email and text
Mm-hmm.
most often, right? Is because we can't like read the tone and we can't see the facial expressions. And so we all as humans have really strong protectors that we work with, right? Things that parts of us that keep us really safe, parts of us that keep us from getting harmed unnecessarily. And most of the time, our protectors are like really overactive and they are attuned to threats, even when threats aren't necessarily present.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if we know that about ourselves, then we know how to access support so that we can get the information that we need and we're not setting ourselves up for stories that aren't helpful,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, if I know that, like, if this person reaches out to me by written communication somehow, I'm going to get all amped up. Then I'm going to create like a deal with them that if they text me or call me, then or if they text me or email me, I'm going to pick up the phone and call them.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk it out together so that I'm not spinning out about what I think they mean or what I think they feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to one comment in the chat as well, because when we were talking about kind of what you can do in the immediate moment,
Yeah.
Tip put a comment in the chat and said, go for a walk. And I want to, like, if you're feeling overwhelmed and overworked and you can go for a quick walk, even if it's just like 5 minutes, or even if you can only just step out of whatever room you're in, something like that can be really super helpful if you're able to do it. And I know that not always can you step away because you're on 1,000 meetings a day and you can't get away from your phone because you're having to be on camera or whatever, or you can't step away because you're doing something with your kids or whatever. But if you can just go for that walk, there was a day just recently where I was really having just a super rotten day, and I posted about it in our Discord. And I was definitely doing a little bit of ranting, which we have a channel for, so that was fine. And I think it was Alpha. Alpha was like, I prescribe a 5-minute walk for you. And I was like, I can't go for a walk right now, but you know what I can do? I can walk to the kitchen and refill my water. And it's like, that is as much as I could do in that moment. But yeah, things like going for a walk in the moment, that can be super, super helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So walking is what we call like bilateral movement, meaning it moves both of sides of your body at the same time, which is regulating to your nervous system. So if you can't go for a walk, there are other options that can initiate the same response or the same behavior. So things like doing like a butterfly hug and tapping like this. So that's engaging both the left and right side of your body and the left and right side of your brain. Things like drumming, right? So even if it's not on your body, but you're like hitting either side of your knee, which I'm doing right now, but you can't see, that can be really regulating. Something to like chewing gum. When you chew gum, your heartbeat starts to match the rate at which you're chewing. So it will automatically like slow down your heart rate. Yeah. Which is really handy. Other things like when we're feeling really stressed or overwhelmed, sometimes the anecdotes or the suggestions can be like, take a bath, meditate, like read a book, drink some tea, you know, like do all these like really calming and soothing activities. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when we do feel like a shaken up can of soda pop, that makes us want to like burn our homes down, right? Like I can't do that right now. And so I like to engage in what I call like high output activities. So it could be something like jumping jacks or going on a walk or going on a run. It could also be pushing on the wall as hard as you can. It could be pulling up on the bottom of your chair seat with as much like tension as you can pull. Those are like really quick and easy ways that don't require people to see what you're doing or notice what's happening, where you can move some of that energy out of your body when you're feeling really overwhelmed. Temperature shifting is another really good one. So ice can be really helpful. So if you have one of those ice rollers that you can get on Amazon for super cheap for your face, or putting like a cold compress on your neck or like the back of your neck or your chest, an ice cube in your mouth, all of those things are like really helpful for you to get back in your body and out of your brain. That's why people are into like cold plunging.
Oof.
I know.
Good for them.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's great for those who enjoy it.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that about chewing gum and the heart rate thing. Mm-hmm. That's really neat.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great one. But really, like running, jumping, skipping, playing basketball, drumming, tapping, all of these things engage both sides of our bodies and help regulate our nervous system.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
And then Tib followed up and said, a physical exhaustion is about all that gets me out of a bad rut. Like I keep mentally exhausting myself. So I'll do the opposite and exhaust the body, force back the mind-body connection. Role play as an ancient hunter-gatherer. I like that. I like that phrasing. Role play as an ancient hunter-gatherer. That's good. Yeah, and it's great that you know what works for you. Like that's if that's what works for you and it's kind of tried and true for you. I think a lot of what we talk about, especially when it comes to mental health, obviously there's not one solution that's going to work for everyone. Otherwise everyone would do it. Right. So It's very much find what works for you. And it sounds like you've got that, Tib, which is great.
Yeah. I like to encourage the folks that I work with to have kind of a buffet of options so that when you're kind of getting to a 7, 8, or 9 out of 10, you can do like a quick, okay, that's the one I want to do right now, instead of the only thing I have access to is like journaling and taking a walk. And I can't do either of those things right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much. And I would also, because we've talked about this in our community quite a bit, don't try to come up with your buffet when you're in the middle of a crisis or you're in the middle of the overwhelm and overwork part of that. Like try to do that when you're not in the middle of it.
That's right.
You're going to be much more helpful, much more productive. Because it is hard to see. Well, you were talking about the snow globe. It's hard to see, even if you can Google, ways to get out of overwhelm and everything. And even looking at that, it's like, okay, well, none of that sounds good right now. Of course, none of it sounds good right now.
That's right. That's right. And so when we integrate some of these things into our day-to-day lives, meaning like we are deserving of support every day, even if we're not like really uncomfortable with how we're feeling. it makes it so much easier to pull on those things when we are feeling uncomfortable because we know that they work. The reason why when we Google and we're like, I don't feel like doing any of that, or our brain immediately goes to, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, is because those are those protectors again coming out and saying like, it's not going to work. You're not going to feel better. Nothing's going to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. In your bio, you mentioned that you work with people going through transition. So how can those kind of periods of change contribute to those feelings of overwhelm? And what strategies do you recommend for someone who is in a period of transition like that and how to manage that?
Yeah. So periods of transition, again, talk about like shifts in job, shifts in relationships, shifts in family dynamics, shifts in finances, shifts in health. All of these things are what you would consider transitions. So if we think about stress on a continuum, there all the way over here, we start with something that's called positive stress, which could be, again, we're like our family dynamic is changing. We're like welcoming partners or children into our family. We're starting a new job. We're moving to a new community. These can all, we're falling in love, right? Like these are things that are like quote unquote good typically, or we think about as good. We're graduating from high school, we're graduating from college, but there's also some uncertainty and fear that's involved in those transitions of, even though I believe that this will be good, I'm still feeling really disorganized right now, or I'm feeling really uncertain. So that's our positive stress, and all the way up to like we have circumstantial stress, which again is like got in a car accident, something bad happened, something unexpected happened, and then to like more serious or significant situations that like we would consider traumatic. The reason those all feel destabilizing in their own different ways is because it shakes our foundation a little bit. So it messes with our routine and messes with what we know to be true or comfortable or familiar. And when we shift our routines or we shift expectations or we shift goals, it shakes us a little bit, right? Of like, I really want this, or this is necessary, but also I don't know if I'm prepared. I don't know if I'm equipped. I'm not certain that I have what I need in order to be successful. And so again, even if they're good things, they still like make us feel a little messy inside. So that is one of the reasons why in those seasons of life, we tend to feel a little bit more overwhelmed, because we don't have familiar life to come back to at the end of the day. We don't have, our constants don't feel constant anymore, and that has shifted and changed. And so when some of these transitions are anticipated, right? Like we know they're going to happen, we plan for them to happen. Oftentimes I really support or suggest that folks consider, as they're moving into that season, what they can take off their plate, like what they cannot do. So if we think about our capacity as like a bank account, right? We have things that withdraw and we have things that deposit. And when we are going into an event or a circumstance that we know is going to withdraw more than it's going to deposit, even if it's good, it means that those resources have to come from somewhere. So I need to be really judicious about what I can or cannot commit to. I need to start like looking at the landscape of the next 30 days of my life and saying, I know I said that we could go to dinner in 2 weeks, but I need to cancel. Or I know that I, promised to host book club this month, but I can't do it anymore. Or like even the small things that we might enjoy and they might be really fun and we might be looking forward to, we need to be a little bit more critical around what our resources are. So there's also times where we think about like, is this when I start like online grocery shopping? Is this when I start kind of like asking for help in other ways that I wouldn't typically do, because I have less time and I have less skill and I have less patience than I would typically?
Yeah. Listen, I online grocery shop exclusively, so.
I do too. I don't know why anyone goes to the store anymore.
The only reason I'll be going back to the store is they're about to finish the remodel on the HEB that's near me, and when they finish that,
Nice.
I will go in. When they're completely done, I will go in one time.
Check it out. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
But again, that feels like fun, and it's not,
Yes.
it doesn't feel like I have to. So
Yeah.
I will call this like the no new friends. When I talk to clients about this, of like, we're not making new friends right now. We're not our best self. We're not like picking up new hobbies or joining new gyms. We're just like getting from point A to point B.
Yeah. Yeah. Tib has a comment in the chat, says anytime something comes up, how can I quit my job? I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, you gotta make sure that you're doing things that are gonna serve you long term, but I get it.
That's right. Yeah,
And
that's
then
right.
Craig, I see your comment as well. If you have any questions about being overworked and overwhelmed versus that kind of finding the balance and the peace, feel free to pop those into the chat and we'll address them while we are here live. So you are a therapist, and you've got a full life. How do you personally maintain balance and peace in your own life, especially given the demands of what you do?
Yeah. So that's sometimes better than others, to be totally honest. So I like to really look at what's happening in my personal life and help balance that with what's happening in my professional life. So again, when there's seasons like, I have 2 new therapists joining my practice in the next 2 weeks. That's going to be like the next 2 to 4 weeks are going to be like a no new friends time for me, because I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time at work and training and supporting new people and feeling prepared to do their jobs and to do them well than I would typically need to be doing that. We also just had like one of our kids just moved out today and got his first apartment. And that is like really sweet and beautiful. And also there's some like sadness in that too. Yeah. So this past week or two, I've been really like thoughtful around how I'm scheduling myself at work so that I feel like I have plenty of time at home, or that I'm available to like help him buy, I don't know, silverware or the coffee table, or, like whatever that might be. And so it is about like looking at where you do have flexibility in your life and adjusting accordingly. And I know there have been seasons of my life where I've had like next to no flexibility. And then those are spaces where I'm like, I'm going to meal prep on Sunday. I'm going to do some of these other things to set myself up for the week so that I'm not getting home at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, starving and tired and angry and frustrated when nobody in my family has done anything wrong yet.
Yeah. Look, I have plenty of days where I'm like, y'all are fine. This is me. I'm the one having a problem.
That's right. And it will go away soon.
Yeah.
We just need to ride it out.
Man, kid just moved out. I'm not looking forward. We were talking about kids before this, and I am not looking forward to the day when mine goes to college, not even moves out fully, but just like goes to college. It's going to be so different and weird. And I was talking to my sister about this not very long ago, and her kid just moved out a little while ago, and it's like, it's weird. It is weird.
It is really weird. And it's like what you want them to do.
Yeah, yes.
Just like not now.
Yeah, this is what you spent their whole life equipping them to do. And then at the same time, you're like, shit, no, don't go.
That's right. I didn't
Except also go.
Right. But like go.
Yeah, but don't. But go. But don't.
Yeah. So it feels like that is, I think, what transition feels like in general, is this tug of war of like, this is good, but don't, but this is too much, but go. And so it is just also like a naming and acknowledging that there's no way for this to happen like easily, comfortably. Yeah. Like we're supposed to have feelings about these things.
Yeah. It's not always, not everything can't be easy.
No.
I wish it could. You also talked about enjoying matchmaking and connecting people. How do you see social connections contributing to a balanced and peaceful life?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think our connection to community and our perception of our belonging and our like feeling loved is one of the greatest protective factors we have, right? So it's one of the greatest things that keeps us feeling healthy, well, safe, supported, is knowing that we talked about resilience at the very beginning. There's like an actual resilience questionnaire or resilience test that you can administer as a mental health professional. And what they are assessing for is your sense of connection. So, do I love people and do people love me? Can I trust people and can people trust me? And your sense of what they name in this assessment as mastery. So, I can do hard things or I can resource myself well to get hard things done. Those are the two primary ingredients that help us determine how resilient someone is. And so, one of the things that I really appreciate about knowing that is that it gives us something to do, right? Like if I'm feeling more delicate or I'm feeling like not myself, then I can look at and say, like, do I feel equipped to manage the life that I have right now? No, is typically the answer to that question. Okay. Do I feel connected to people in my life? Right. Also, maybe no, sometimes. And so then I can assess like what feels like the low hanging fruit so that I can help build some momentum. So if it's like, I do have ADHD and like one of my favorite things in the world is to find a new hobby and a new project to do that I never finish or that I never come back to. But like maybe now would be a time for me to pick up a new hobby or try something new. Or maybe it's time for me to schedule time with friends or other people that I love so that I can feel connected and I can feel like I belong.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's huge. And no matter where you find that community.
Yeah. I wonder, so I'm in the stage of my life where all of my friends are also parents and I'm a parent and we're
Yeah.
all busy, and I just last month one of my girlfriends and I, we were trying to get together and it was like, okay, yeah, these weekends in July, and literally I blinked and it was August and I was like, hey, July's
Mm-hmm.
gone. How about August? So, do you have any
Mm-hmm.
advice for like where does that fall in prioritization if your whole friend group is just always busy? Is it important enough to like put your foot down a little bit and say, no, we have to get together. Let's really make this happen. Or do you suggest things like going to some sort of group class, whether that's building something at Home Depot or going and painting something at a painting class? Or is that enough of a social connection if you don't know someone? Or is it important to really connect with the people that you already know and care about? I guess is my question.
Yeah. So we often like this is part of what we do naturally as humans is we um like try and figure out the good, better, best, right? And when we're in this season of life, or like this counts but this doesn't count, right? I think it really just counts on what feels accessible to you.
Mm,
So if it's going to an art class or pottery class or Home Depot class or whatever it is, and that feels like the easiest avenue for you, go do that. If it feels like working in a coffee shop and like I might not be able to talk to anybody, but I'm around other people and that helps me, go do that. If it feels like, nope, I really need to see my girlfriend and like really need to connect with her or really need to spend time with my sister or whatever that is, say that to that person
mm,
that's in your life of like, I miss you and I want to spend some time with you. Can we make that a priority in the next couple of weeks?
yeah.
It all counts, right? So it's also about thinking like, how do I want to feel when I'm done with this time? Right? And when we go in with an intention of how we want to feel when we're done, we're pretty good at meeting that intention to the best
Mm,
of our ability.
yeah. I do. I am meeting with her in a couple weeks, but
Yeah.
because I did have that conversation. I was like, hey, let's not let another month go by. Let's make
Yeah.
this happen. But yeah, I mean, you know, I feel like sometimes we get so wrapped up, or I get so wrapped up in my head about like, well, this is what you need. And then
Yeah.
I stop looking for those alternatives and I just say, well, this isn't happening. So I'm just not, it's just not going to happen. but it's like there's all these other ways you can fulfill that need, and it's
Mhm.
hard to see past that sometimes.
Well, and like one of the marks for mental wellness, or one of the things we look for people as they're kind of like growing, evolving, changing, whatever that may be for them, is a like an opportunity for what we call like cognitive flexibility. So our mindset is flexible. So much to your point of like, I might not need to go to the gym every day, but like going today counts.
Hmm.
It doesn't make it a waste of the experience if I'm not doing it all the time every day.
Yeah.
Or going and like I've had friends sit with me while I'm getting lab work done, right? Because like we couldn't find another time to hang out and they were nearby and I was
Yep.
waiting and they came and sat with me, right? And I wouldn't hesitate to do that for one of them if I was available to do that. Of like that still counts as quality time, even if
Hmm.
we're not going out to dinner or getting drinks or like having a weekend away together. It can just be like a point of connection.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we're coming up on our last couple of questions. So, anybody who's here in chat, if you have any questions that you want to ask about tonight's topic or ask of Anne, feel free to pop them in. But our next question is, what is your favorite life hack?
Hmm. Oh, I feel like I'm like constantly looking for new life hacks or new things to kind of like make my life easier. And I don't think I'm alone in that. Um, I would say one of my favorite life hacks right now, and this is not going to be like surprising to anyone, is using ChatGPT as like a thought partner
Mm.
when I'm trying to brainstorm things or try and like find new ways to say something or um yeah, so that can be really fun. Or like something that I don't want to reinvent the wheel on, right? So if I'm having like a client that needs to write a resignation letter or can like use that to just spit out like a really nice template. Um, so that is a life hack that I really enjoy. I also am a big fan of habit stacking, which is from Atomic Habits by James
Mhm.
Clear. So it's finding the things that you're already doing and stacking something new on top of that habit. So, like, for instance, if you brush your teeth every morning and you never remember to take your meds, you like stick your pill bottle right next to your toothbrush or your toothpaste. Um, if you are see. Like one of the things I really struggle with is like in the morning, I just feel like completely annoyed with the fact that I need to eat something or take something with me to work to eat. So I like stash food everywhere in my office so that I don't have to kind of like problem solve that in the morning before I go to work, or I meal prep and I put stuff in the freezer so I can take it with me. Um, Another life hack that is really helpful for me is I still do brain dumps where I like write down all the things that I'm thinking about, worried about, wondering about, wanting to learn about, and then I can like categorize them so that I can put them into to-dos. I can put them into like when I have free time and I want to look something up. Um, and that helps me like stay on top of my never-ending task list.
Yeah. I should have asked earlier like what you do after a brain dump, because sometimes like my
Mm.
brain dumps, I'll dump it and then just be like, bye, those thoughts are all gone now.
I don't need to go with you anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which in some cases is fine. Like sometimes you do, you just need to
totally.
get it out and be
Mhm.
like, okay, well now I'm not thinking about having to Google this actor later, and I will never Google that actor later, but I don't have to
Right,
because I'm not thinking about it anymore.
right, right. Yeah. So, are you familiar with the Eisenhower matrix?
No.
Okay, so it's like a time management system, and it's essentially like a four square grid. So
Hmm.
you have four boxes, and up in the top left hand corner is urgent and important, and then you have important and not urgent, and then you have not
Okay.
urgent and important, and then you have not important and not urgent. So you take your brain dump and then you put it into an Eisenhower matrix, and then it gives you like, okay, these are the things that I need to do now, 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 right? They are time sensitive and they are really important. these are the things that are for later. And then as you're kind of like working through that, you can recategorize as needed. So Googling that actor goes into non-urgent, not important.
I like that. That's great. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to there's a lot of examples online of it. I don't know
Yeah,
like if there's an official one or whatever, but I'll
I
find a
don't think
link
so.
to one
Yeah.
to to put
Yeah.
in here.
Yeah. So that can be really helpful when you're like in the now what? Like, okay,
Yeah.
I did the thing, now what?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is time for the magic moment of the stream. Every time I think this is gonna not work anymore because it gets there we go. Okay. If you could wave a magic wand and eliminate one common opinion or misconception surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health, what would it be?
The misconception that we're meant to do it alone.
Mm,
Like, we've never done it alone. We're not meant to do it alone. We're meant to heal together. We're meant to heal in community. We're meant to problem solve in community. So the feelings of inadequacy that people have for needing help or wanting help or not being able to figure it out is the human experience.
yeah. I I really think that that's something that gets a little lost sometimes
Yeah. Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
is so easy to stay in your own head
Mm-hmm.
and like we were talking about, it's so easy to stay in your own head and freak out about stuff that you don't necessarily need to be freaking out about.
Totally. Yeah. But if you can't see the forest from the trees, then you're stuck, right? And so remembering that, and that might be your opposite action, right? If you're like typically you try and figure it out by yourself, then maybe this is the time that you like lean in and ask someone for help or just
Yeah.
share with them that you're struggling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bitemark would like to know, what is your favorite poem?
Oh, I would have to say The Journey by Mary Oliver is one of my favorite poems. So I think it speaks to like what we've talked about tonight as far as having grace with ourselves or having patience with ourselves in not necessarily knowing how we're going to get where we're going and being open to the possibility. Um, and I had a professor in school who had a podcast. Oh, I'll have to think of the name of it, but her name was Leah Barrett, and she was a therapist, and she had terminal cancer. So she had ovarian cancer that she passed away from just about a year ago, probably at this point, maybe a year and a half ago. And she was a really big fan of Mary Oliver, so it feels like sweet to reference that for her. So
Yeah.
I'll look up the name of the podcast if people are interested.
Was that one Precarious? Is that the right?
Yes, Precarious is the name of the podcast.
All right, let me share that one as well.
Yeah.
It looks like it's not loading. Okay, I'll find a link to that podcast and see.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess Stitcher got sold or
Hmm.
something. So now that one's not working. Okay, I've got it on Apple, but I'll
Yeah.
find it on another service and provide both links on the resources page afterwards. Well, I want
Yeah.
to thank you for taking the time out, and I'll just open this up to you and say if there's anything that you're working on that you want people to know about, or anything that we didn't talk about, recommendations, resources, all of that. And then I will also post your socials one more time. So if anyone here is looking to connect with Anne, feel free to click through website, Instagram. I'm going to post those one more time. And Anne, I'll just give you the floor for a little bit.
Thanks. Yeah, I think some of the stuff we talked about earlier tonight, we didn't name as boundary work, but when we're talking about saying no, that is part of boundaries, right? And knowing how to navigate our relationships. I would say there is a woman who is an author. She also has a pretty big Instagram following or social media following. And her name is Nedra Tawwab, and she wrote a book called Setting Boundaries, Find Peace. And so her resources are really beautiful, and there are some free worksheets on her website that would be helpful for someone who's like flirting with maybe shifting how they're showing up in their relationships, whether personally or professionally. I think if there's other like resources about this that can be helpful. I think back to the idea of like good, better, best. While I don't necessarily like to attribute some things as being good and other things as being best, I think thinking about things as far as like this is, so for thinking about boundaries or relationships or how I want to say no, we can think about like what is the softest way I can say no. So for your example of like, I can do that in 3.5 weeks, right? Which is like saying no without saying no.
Yeah.
So that would be like the most gentle way of saying no. So that could be like a green light saying no. Then we can think about a yellow light saying no, which would be like, in order to do that, I would need to not do this other thing, right? Which is just kind of like letting the other person choose what feels most important to them. And so that could be your yellow light. It's like a little bit more assertive. And then your red light of saying no could be like, I'm not available for that. Right. And so when you are confronted with these situations, it does give you an opportunity to say like, okay, what are the spectrum of options as far as what I can say, which helps us find something that we're maybe a little bit more aligned with, because it might not be reasonable for someone who is like I can do this in 3.5 weeks to just go to like, no, I can't do that. Right. And when we place value on like, no, I can't do that is better than I can do it in 3.5 weeks, it keeps us feeling trapped as far as like what I'm doing isn't good enough. And so finding like, where's the space in between and what feels most appropriate for this relationship, for this situation, and for my comfort level. So that would be another thing to consider.
Yeah, I like all of those. And I've got a couple of things that you just mentioned, the book and the website and everything. I've got those on there. So if anybody's looking for those, they're there for you. Well, Anne, thank you so much. This has been a really lovely conversation. I appreciate you taking the time and joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. This was awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sticking with me through today's episode of Even Tacos Fall Apart. There's something really validating about hearing someone put words to the struggles so many of us face. Whether it's feeling like you have to be everything for everyone, battling the constant push to do more, or figuring out how to reclaim your time and energy in a way that feels sustainable. Anne's insights really hit home for me, especially when she talked about how being overwhelmed can stem from living out of alignment with our values. That is such a powerful reminder to take a step back and ask ourselves why we're saying yes to certain things and whether those commitments are really serving us. Her advice about small, actionable steps, like checking in on your basic needs or doing a quick brain dump, is the kind of practical guidance I think we can all use, especially when things feel out of control. I also loved her point about how transitions, even positive ones, can shake up our sense of balance. Life is constantly changing, and it's okay to admit when things feel messy. But it's also important to remind ourselves that we don't have to navigate those changes alone. Like Anne said, we're not meant to do this by ourselves. Connection, community, and even just having someone who can say, I see you and I'm here, can make all the difference. So as you go about your week, I encourage you to think about one small thing you can do to prioritize your own peace, whether it's taking a real break, saying no to something that doesn't align with your values, or just reaching out to someone for support. It all adds up. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love it if you could do a couple of things. First, make sure you're following Even Tacos Fall Apart on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And if you have a moment, leaving a quick review or rating really helps this show reach more people who might need to hear these conversations. Plus, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stuck with you from today's episode? You can also share this episode with a friend or family member who you think could use some encouragement or practical tips for navigating overwhelm. Sometimes all it takes is a reminder that you're not alone to brighten someone's day. And finally, if you want to connect with me or dive deeper into any of the topics we've covered, you'll find ways to connect and other resources down in the show notes. Don't be shy. Drop me a message again at MommaFoxFire. Share your story or just say hi. I'm here for any of it. Thank you again for being part of this community and for showing up for yourself today. Life isn't always easy, but conversations like these remind us that there's always a way forward, one step at a time. Until next time, take care of yourself and know that even when things feel overwhelming, you are not alone.